Wheels parted company.
That's pretty much where their vaccination program is at the moment.
What it means for Australia as our jab rollout falls drastically behind schedule.
I said in the first week it had gone well for our side, and look, that's just continuing on despite vision of ScoMo, Berejiklian, Greg Hunt, Brendan Murphy, all getting the jab supposedly. Of course, you know, they're not really getting what they're going to give to you and me, along with their non-stop marketing campaign and just talking how everyone's going to be getting this thing. It's just not working for them. There is a link to a 2-page draft version that I can get some feedback on if people would like to give it. But I do a long-winded explanation later on in this video. But before I get to that long-winded explanation, so to finish off watching this, this is the late, great Barry Sheen and the fate of this tyre.
3 wheels on my wagon.
It's a pretty dangerous thing. So anybody coming down the hill will be warned by the marshals that it's well behaved at the moment,
Yes,
isn't it?
it is, isn't it?
Be warned by the marshals that there's debris on the circuit. Now, you're going to have to watch this thing because it'll go straight through in this right-hander. Be careful, John Bauer. Be careful, Stephen Ellery.
No, it's going to miss Ellery.
Look at that.
How about
Beautiful timing.
Oh, that's going to go straight there. Oh, over the tyres. You couldn't do it if you tried, could you?
Look at that. There with its cousins.
Yeah, that's what they call a control.
Now, they're still coming up with fanciful reasons as to why they're falling way behind, and the latest one is apparently over in Denmark and Iceland, there was some blood clot issues with the AstraZeneca jab, and they were banging on about vaccines or their liquids going to the wrong locations and people not turning up. What they're not mentioning, or I haven't seen mentioned, is this form from the Australian government, consent form for COVID-19 vaccination. The second line's interesting. It's free and you choose whether to have the vaccination or not. I'll come back to that sentence in a minute. And they want you to sign as having given consent. And there's 3 things that you got to tick, sign, and also for the Guardian as well, for people that are obviously in old people's homes or they can't represent themselves. Now, in the past, I've received the flu jab through work, actually. I've never seen these forms, never had to sign any form like this. And for the vaccination of your children through the National Immunisation Program, I haven't seen any of these forms. Just go along, doctor gives them the injection. Now, this is a very specific form. And again, nothing's been advertised about it, but I can only presume that they've got this form there, that they need to get your signature on this before they will actually administer it. That's because in the first instance, it's not approved. Provisional approval is not approved. And secondly, it's new technology outside of what they tell people in these consumer information sheets. It's modifying your RNA. It's gene modification. And just with the unknown side effects of something that's not approved, on top of that is the unknown, well, I dare say known, but they will say unknown, consequences of the gene modifying component of this thing. So when Carl says that they're, way behind, I think either, I'm not sure how this is playing out. Again, they're not talking about this, but people are, maybe even accepting the invitations. There'll be a certain percentage, and a lot would balk at having to sign something like this. Well, what am I signing this for? No, thanks. Now, it seems quite comforting at the moment. Well, I just won't sign that form. I'm 100% safe. I don't believe that's how this is going to play out. This is the first phase of trying to get as many people with consent to take this poison that's going to have adverse effects. And also part of their policy is that it's not mandatory. They haven't said what it is, and voluntary, they won't make that. They say that it's not mandatory. I've been over that before, but this is an interesting statement here. You choose whether to have the vaccination or not. And the first thing to note about that sentence there is that's a standing statement in that it's not applying to a particular event. It's just generally you choose whether to have the vaccination or not. So that applies when you turn up, you read this thing, you have a bit of a look at it and go, oh, yeah, no, thanks, I'm choosing not to. But there's also the case that, but the interpretation and use of the word choose, because it's not defined here, is that it can be applied to another scenario, that being the implied consent that you give at election time when you vote in your representatives. They're representing you, and any laws that they create, there is an implied consent to the enactment of those laws. And as I've said before, they can claim in the absence of you not withdrawing that consent, not saying no, saying to them, I do not consent, and them simply not giving you the opportunity and not listening to any no, because remember, they say here, you choose whether to have this vaccination or not. Well, if that truly was the case, then right at the start, they would have gone out to everyone, what are your intentions? Okay, we've got 5% of the population to put their heads up. We'll buy enough vaccines for 5% or jabs for 5%. But no, they've bought them in advance for 25 million, and they keep telling you that 25 million people are going to be getting this thing. So look, their bad start to this is only their initial program. They haven't deviated from, and I haven't heard anyone say from the government that, we're revising down the 25 million to another estimated figure. They're not. 100% of the people are going to get this according to them. So in this first phase, it's all a bit quiet at the moment. We were in this position last year. Remember, at the beginning of March, the footy seasons were still kicking off. Everything seemed quite normal. And how quickly did that change once they had justification, because the actual flu turned up in flu season, as it does every year. They then, more people are going to get tested now, purely because they got the flu, not because they got this thing. Then they got justification to ramp up everything that they did, which is lockdowns, masks. It's all going to come back this winter, 100%. They had those mini lockdowns for 5 days for one person in a hotel quarantine, having some of the fragments or however that PCR test worked. 2 million people locked down for 5 days, and that they were rolling that around the country in various locations. Well, if they're going to do that, then if someone sneezes, you could actually look like they've got some kind of equivalent symptoms to this thing. They are going to go absolutely, it's going to become mental again. And those bizarre scenes of cops chasing people down, some of them were acted out, we know that, but some of them weren't at some of those protests. And we've seen it, if you watch UK Column, some of the violence perpetrated by the police over there. It's all going to come back, and all the pressure's going to ramp up. And we're going to move from this sort of quiet stage where everything seems quite normal. Can we have your consent via this form to, they're going to ramp up the emergencies. All these health orders are going to come out. There's going to be they've already been written. They just haven't been published yet at the time. The time hasn't come for that part of the plan to be implemented. But that is what is going to happen. Guaranteed. It seems really quiet. You get really comfortable. Everything's normal. Kids are at school. That can change. What was it? They closed the border 8 hours before for midnight, and all Victorians couldn't get back in over Christmas. They're using ridiculous powers, and the time frames for which things can change can be immediate, as we've all witnessed and we all know. So now onto the letter. Okay, I didn't make yesterday's deadline, but look, that's not really a problem. It's going to come up in, as the flu season starts. So I've got to say a couple of weeks. I said things can happen really fast, so we'll get this out as quickly as possible. But I'm being really specific. In fact, I'm going to just publish something that you can use, the first 2 pages. But what I want to include in this document is, like I said, a brief of evidence building up the case, and not just the I do not consent because, for superficial reasons, going to go right down into it. So this is it here at the moment. This first page, just abbreviated terms. Always do that to make life easier further down. So here's what I've got. Statement of position. Here's how I've broken it down. I hereby advise Australian governments, and Australian governments are defined as Australian, Commonwealth, State and Territory governments. I've done that to cover broadly across all of them, because they got rid of COAG, which bound them all together into this national. They got rid of that because it had too many restrictions on what they wanted to do. This national cabinet, they're all arguing with each other. They're all doing different things. So I've included all governments in regards to this statement. Okay, so I do not consent to the medicines provisional and medicines TBA. Again, it comes back to here. Medicines provisional is the Pfizer and the AstraZeneca, and I've got a breakdown so everyone knows exactly what it is, right down to the approval by the TGA number, that identifying number. Now, I've included medicines to be announced, medicines yet to be provisionally approved by the TGA for COVID, because they could approve something in the time that you've sent this off afterwards and say, well, this only applies to these. So I've future-proofed it as far as extra additional medicines or whatever they want to do, what they call vaccines to be approved. So now I've broken this down into two parts. Statement of position. So this is your legal position. This is where you are. So I hereby advise you, it's very broad, that I do not consent to the medicine being inside the physical body of myself or dependents until further notice. I did have things like do not want to be injected, but look, we've just gone straight to do not consent. So however they get that into you, then that you've gone right to the fact that you don't want this stuff inside of you or your dependents until further notice. Again, until they hear from you again, that's the position. There's no expiry on this position when you write that in. Now, demands. So what I've done is, so that's your position, and here's your demands. This is like a letter of demand to them, to assure that the statement of position is assured. So employees of Australian governments and persons, including but not limited to, this is what they're going to do. Your demand that they don't do it are not to communicate by any means. So you don't want any marketing, invitations, or correspondence with the intent that myself or I have the medicine. Okay, and approach, this is the most important part, approach and or engage with me with the intent that myself and my dependents have the medicine. So I'm going to maybe expand on that to include so I've got up here, military personnel. So that covers that legislation. So I haven't got foreign or Australian, it's just straight up military personnel under Australian government directives. So those foreigners can only come once they've been given a directive by the Defence Minister and under Australian government's directive. So that, again, that covers both the state, either inviting them or not inviting them. Don't want to get too complicated, just cover everything. So that's why I've included that part there. And Australian governments publish a quota policy that medicines are not mandatory to unconditionally voluntary. So that's a demand. This not mandatory, you can choose. They need to state that it's policy, that it's unconditionally voluntary. So they're stating what it is. So therefore outside of things. Now, I've also included this part as the letter of demands. Again, you can edit this however you want and send off whatever you want, add, delete, whatever. I've got here Australian governments inform private entities via official letter that under threat of legislation, public policy, including but not limited to health, is implemented through Australian governments representing Australians and does not originate or is implemented by unelected directors, board members, managers. This is this nonsense that you've got private corporations, and this will be expanded upon in the explanatory notes, but you've got private corporations and this Alan Joyce running around who's just got another bucket load of money from us, by the way, via that supposed helping the tourism industry. They've just given the money to the airlines. So, for their balance sheet, so they can pay their shareholders profits. So it stops this ridiculous scenario where Alan Joyce is saying you can't fly. He's dictating public policy. Now, Qantas doesn't have any doctors, or they might have first aid, maybe one or two doctors, but they don't have the billions. It's determined by the Australian government public policy through us, and all that money spent on all of the research, on all of these bureaucrats, hundreds of billions of dollars, and they've come up with that they need your consent. They're asking for your consent. So it's not mandatory, and you get to choose. Whereas you've got private companies usurping that and imposing public policy on you in regards to their business. Now, that they do their business under the Corporations Act, in one of the underlying conditions of any corporation or business, foreign or internal, is that you are there to the satisfaction of the public. You're there to serve the people of Australia with your product and service. You're not there to start dictating to the Australian public any public policy, including health. So that's going to be expanded upon as well. Now, as far as signing it, what I've got here is declaration as to statement and demands. So this is your signature, that is your position, and affirms that you've got a letter of demand on them, or equivalent of. So I'm an Australian citizen. So as far as identifying yourself, rather than, driver's license and all that, just do it via the electoral office. So I'm an Australian permanent resident. So your name, your address, and signed on this date. So that ties it into who you are through the Australian Electoral Commission. So it's very simple by stating that you're eligible to vote. And it might say enrolled to vote, change that as well. And I'm still just working on this bit here. I just deleted one part there. So having researched information records so I do hereby solemnly declare and affirm that I make the statements and demands herein based on having researched information records, publications by Australian governments. And in fact, when you read through what I'm going to have in explanatory notes, that's you doing the research, even if it's contained within this document, because I will include links to everything that I include in the explanatory notes. And informed consent as detailed in it. So in regards to informed consent, I had a screenshot of that. And demands are made within the legislative scope and power of the Australian government. You can't make a letter of demand for something, obviously, stating the obvious here, for someone that they can't do it. So that's just reaffirming that everything in your demands is within their scope, because they are the ones that are running this public health policy, or will be, as far as taking out these private corporations as one of their coercive methods, because it's a three-step process. Obviously, the first one is what they're in now, trying to get your consent via that form. Then they're going to go through coercion. You can't go for a drink. We're going to have to negate that, and put pressure onto them. You don't consent, or you've got a letter of demand that that's not to be the case, and it contained in this document. And then we're going to have they will come to it. Like I said, they have not diverted one iota from the statement that they've made that 25 million people are getting this thing. That they haven't diverted from it. And that's the third stage, as I mentioned before, we've seen before, that's going to go absolutely mental during the it's going to be so much chaos, that intentional chaos in our lives that they're going to cause, to discombobulate, confuse people, get people scared, and then they're going to go, take this jab. You don't. That's when you're going to have, under their protections from civil immunity, and they're under an order that gets around that they can jab you with it without you having any avenue of recourse as far as litigation goes. And that's going to be the final one. So, all right, look, that's it for this one. It's gone on for too long. So, this letter, I will publish this one now, so you can add to this if you want. As far as all of the material to back up and make the case, as I said in a brief of evidence, I'm working on that. I don't want to give a time for a date for when, because I just keep missing it. Things come up in my life, as we all do. We're all busy. I run out of time here and there, and I really want to make sure that I don't miss anything, or do my best in order to that when we submit this to them, there is absolutely no confusion as to your position or the reasons that you've come to that. And it's all based on, not on their, they try and throw in 5G and a few, it's probably real actually, but you could actually, from their point of view, they can make fun of that. None of that. It's all from their information, from what they provide. So that's it for this one. Here's an original document. So you can use this as a last resort if things change tomorrow or whatever, and I haven't got the rest of it up. Just use this document, and because it stands alone as it is. Now, as far as you can also you're going to write it off as a letter and attach this in that letter, and it's got to go to the Attorney Generals in each of the Australian governments and territories, or the equivalent of the Attorney Generals. That's as a must, because that's where legal forms such as letter of demand, such as this, are included, are sent to, that's their legal department. So I'm going to be tongue-tied here. I'll drag it on long enough. I'm tired this morning. So, it's got to go to them, and then we're going to send it to the media as an attachment, as a carbon copy, as a CC for them because they're licensed, and I'll also include in the explanatory notes their role and some of what they've been doing, because they've been very nefarious, and that'll all be pointed out based on what they've done. It's not made up, and not making up any stuff, and their position as far as ownership goes, and what controls their content. I'll include that as well. So it's going to be quite a long document eventually, but you've got this one to work with. At this point in time, if you don't hear from me again for some reason, look, I'm here for the long haul. Been around since 2016. Didn't do it a minto, and I intend to be around till 2026 at least. So, but you've got this document anyway. So, all right. That's it for this one.